Was it a show of authority or the beginning of his downfall? When Judge Edward Hardgrove slapped White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt in open court, the room fell silent. He thought he was putting her in her place, but instead that one reckless move lit the fuse that would expose his corrupt empire. And it all unraveled in just 5 minutes. This wasn't just courtroom drama. It was a power play gone wrong, and the aftermath, absolutely explosive. Before we dive into the full story, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the moments the mainstream tries to bury. Washington, D.C. The sun glinted off the white marble of federal buildings, casting long shadows over streets where power strolled in polished shoes and whispered behind mahogany doors. The city, cloaked in symbols of liberty, often masked the truth it was supposed to protect. But this day, this moment would rip that mask off. Inside the federal district courthouse, people moved with deliberate efficiency. Reporters double-checked notepads and mics. Aides whispered updates to suited lawyers, and a handful of camera crews had been granted access to a constitutional hearing expected to be, at most, tense. Nothing more. They were wrong. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the heavy oak doors creaked open. Karoline Leavitt stepped inside, her heels clicking steadily against the marble tile. She wore a navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a low, no-nonsense knot. But it wasn't her outfit that turned heads. It was her presence, the youngest White House press secretary in history. A voice of conviction in a political era drowning in noise. And today she wasn't here to debate from behind a podium or spar with reporters in the press briefing room. Today she was a witness in a lawsuit filed against a conservative media outlet for allegedly spreading misinformation. Her role? To clarify the administration's communication timeline. Straightforward, factual, uncontroversial, or so she thought. Across the room, seated high on the bench, was Judge Thomas Belridge, 66 years old, face lined with years of authority. His gavel had fallen on thousands of cases, but his name was quietly uttered in circles that knew to fear the subtle wielders of power, the ones who didn't shout their bias, but enforced it silently through discretion. His blue eyes narrowed when he saw her. "Trump's girl," he muttered to his clerk. "Here to grandstand." Karoline took her seat near the witness box. She gave a small nod to a few journalists in the back, then folded her hands neatly in her lap, calm, composed, sharp as ever. The proceedings began. Opening statements, questions about communication logs, back and forth between attorneys, dry, procedural. The kind of testimony that normally wouldn't trend on X or get a mention on cable news. Until she spoke. "Miss Leavitt," the plaintiff's attorney asked, "do you believe the White House acted appropriately in its correspondence with the outlet in question?" Karoline nodded. "Absolutely. We followed the legal and ethical protocol every step of the way." The judge raised an eyebrow, already annoyed, but she wasn't speaking out of turn. Not yet. Then came a question from the defense team, a subtle curveball. "Miss Leavitt, considering the judge's previous rulings related to political speech, do you feel confident this courtroom will deliver an impartial assessment of the facts?" A pause, gasp from a few back row reporters. Karoline hesitated for just a moment. Then she turned toward the judge, direct but not confrontational. "With all due respect," she said, "we deserve a court that honors the law, not one that plays politics with it." You could feel the oxygen leave the room. Judge Belridge stiffened. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. The silence stretched. Then he stood. His robe fluttered with the movement, and a collective breath caught in the courtroom's chest. "Miss Leavitt," he growled, "you are out of line." Karoline didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor, I'm standing exactly where the American people expect me to. And then, in a flash of rage, desperation, and something too ancient to name, Judge Belridge descended the bench. He strode down the steps like a man possessed. The bailiffs didn't move, paralyzed by confusion, unsure whether this was real or some performative rebuke. He stood before her, this towering figure in a robe, trembling with indignation. "You think you can lecture this court?" he hissed. Karoline stood slowly, eyes locked on his. "I think I can remind it who it serves." And that's when it happened. The slap. His hand struck her face with a sharp, cracking sound that sliced through the courtroom like a gunshot. Her head snapped to the side, but she didn't stumble. She didn't gasp. She simply touched her cheek, turned, met his eyes. "You just ended your career," she said, and started a movement. The courtroom exploded in shouts. Cameras whirred. Phones were lifted. Reporters shouted into mics. And somewhere in a diner in Iowa, a veteran drinking his morning coffee whispered, "She didn't even flinch." Inside the courtroom, time froze. Judge Belridge stood frozen, his palms still half raised, as though he too was surprised he had done it. The courtroom fell into the kind of silence that felt sacred, not from reverence but disbelief. A young court stenographer dropped her pencil. One of the bailiffs blinked as though waking from a trance. Karoline stood as still as a statue, hand pressed gently to her cheek where a red imprint had bloomed. But her expression was not pain. It was resolve. She turned to face the gallery, journalists, attorneys, spectators, and in a voice that didn't shake, she said, "Every American watching just saw what unchecked power looks like." And then she walked, not rushed, not flustered. Each step was measured, deliberate, her heels tapping out a rhythm that sounded like a drum beat for justice. Outside the courthouse, the morning sun had turned sharp, casting long shadows beneath the grand pillars. Dozens of reporters had gathered for what they thought would be a dry legal commentary. Instead, they were about to witness history. Karoline descended the steps. Her aide, Hannah, ran toward her. "The White House is prepping a statement," she whispered breathlessly. Karoline raised a hand. "No script." "But Karoline, no spin." She stepped to the podium, hastily set up for the press. Flashes flickered. Cameras clicked. The entire nation was watching. "This isn't about me," she said calmly. "It's about every man or woman who ever sat in a courtroom and prayed that the robe before them valued truth more than power." Her voice rang out, not just through microphones, but across streaming feeds, cable broadcasts, and mobile devices across America. Inside, Judge Belridge had locked himself in chambers. His clerk stood at the door, wide-eyed, as Belridge barked orders into a phone. "We need to control this. Get ahead of it. Bury it." On the other end, a voice replied coldly, "You don't bury wildfires, Judge. You just pray they don't reach you." Social media ignited. Within 6 minutes, the hashtag slap of injustice trended globally. Clips of the moment replayed on every major network. Commentators debated legality. Elderly viewers across the country called into talk radio. "I fought in Korea," one man said. "I never thought I'd see a judge slap a woman in open court," and she was the only one who stayed calm. In senior homes, in church basements, in farmhouses, in VFW halls, people watched, and they believed her, because she didn't play the victim. She played the truth. And truth, unshaken, spreads faster than lies ever could. Back in the car, Karoline sat beside Hannah, eyes focused on the road. "They'll try to paint this as provoked," Hannah said. "They'll say you crossed a line." "Good," Karoline replied. "Maybe they'll finally see where the line is." As the SUV rolled past the Lincoln Memorial, Karoline's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "You've made enemies," she stared at it, then hit reply. "Good. That means I'm doing something right." By the next morning, the clip of Judge Belridge slapping Karoline Leavitt had already been viewed 38 million times. But beneath the viral hashtags and split-screen panel debates, a darker truth was beginning to simmer. In a small office just a few blocks from the courthouse, Tom Halley, a semi-retired investigative journalist once dubbed the Bloodhound of Capitol Hill, sat hunched over a dusty archive of judicial rulings. A man of few words and many enemies, Halley had made a career of uncovering what others ignored, and he had watched the slap over and over. Not because of the drama, but because of the judge's eyes. "That wasn't rage," he murmured. "That was fear." He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Hannah, this is Halley. I want to talk to Karoline. I think Judge Belridge just lit the fuse on something bigger." Meanwhile, inside the White House, Karoline paced in the West Wing briefing room, a stack of printouts in her hand, media clippings, smear pieces, wild speculation. "They're saying I staged it," Hannah said, reading from her phone. "Of course they are," Karoline replied. "It's easier to question a woman's honesty than to question a judge's integrity." The press wasn't the only enemy. 2 hours earlier, her husband had received a phone call with no ID, just heavy breathing, then a voice. "If she keeps digging, your boy won't make it to school." Karoline hadn't cried, but she had shaken. Not because she was afraid, but because someone was afraid of her, and that meant she was close. When Halley arrived, he didn't shake hands or ask for coffee. He dropped a leather satchel on the table. "I've been looking into Belridge for 2 years," he said. "Sloppy rulings, sudden reversals, cases tied to major political donors, always ending in his favor." He spread out a timeline of court decisions, donations, and off-the-record meetings. "You see that?" he pointed. "That's not a trend. That's a playbook." Karoline stared at the documents. "Who funds him?" "That's the tricky part," Halley said. "Money moves through cutouts, but there's one name that keeps showing up." He flipped to a photo of a suited man, smiling behind a podium. Senator Miles Devereaux, a household name, a legacy liberal, a man known for championing judicial reform, while keeping a network of loyal judges in his pocket. "He's Belridge's real master," Halley said. "And I think the slap wasn't just rage. It was a warning, because you're getting too close." Karoline leaned forward. "Then we're going to blow it open." Within 24 hours, Karoline requested an emergency meeting with the administration's legal team, not to defend herself, but to launch a formal review of Judge Belridge's rulings and associations. "They'll call it political warfare," one advisor warned. "No," Karoline said. "This is about the Constitution, and I won't let them hide behind the robe." That night she stood before a camera, not with a teleprompter, but with documents in hand. "This nation cannot survive if the very people tasked with defending justice abuse it for power," she said. "This is not about parties. It's about principle." And across America, especially in rural towns, veterans' halls, and homes where the gavel was still respected, people nodded. While the media circled Karoline like sharks around a ship, a quiet conversation unfolded in a Georgetown cafe that would shift the tide entirely. Elena Marks, former clerk for Judge Belridge, sat across from Tom Halley. She was in her late 50s now, with gray streaks in her dark hair and hands that trembled slightly as she held her coffee. "I swore I'd never talk," she said. "But after what he did to that girl," she looked up. "He's not just biased, he's bought." She opened her purse and pulled out a USB drive. "These are court memos, drafts he ordered me to destroy. They show collaboration between Belridge and Devereaux's office. Specific language dictated from Senate aides. Rulings ghostwritten, justice for sale." Halley's fingers shook slightly as he took it. "Will you testify?" "If she's behind me," Elena said, "I'll stand." Back at the White House, Karoline received the files and stared at the screen in silence. She saw everything. Dates, payments, orders, a map of rot. "We go public. We go now," she said. "Not just to take down Belridge. We name every name." That night, Karoline requested a hearing before the Senate Judicial Oversight Committee. Her testimony was electric. "When a judge lifts a hand to silence a witness," she told the committee, "he reveals more than his anger. He reveals his fear. And I intend to find out what he was so afraid of." The next morning, news broke. Belridge was under federal investigation. 2 days later, Senator Devereaux's office was subpoenaed. The morning after that, Eleanor Marks appeared on national TV, her hands shaking as she read an email aloud from Belridge's chambers. "Don't worry, we'll keep the Trump girl in check." The nation went silent. And then it roared. People flooded to the courthouse in support. Elderly war veterans in wheelchairs rolled up the front steps. Mothers brought their daughters to show them what strength looked like. Blue-collar workers who never trusted politicians suddenly believed again. Because Karoline wasn't defending a party, she was defending them. And across social media, the hashtags changed. From Dusher's slap of injustice to Truth Strikes Back, a Just Karoline stands, and the one that stuck, Karoline Leavitt legacy. By the time Judge Thomas Belridge appeared for his emergency ethics hearing, the damage was done. He wasn't wearing his robe. He wasn't wearing his confidence either. He sat hunched beside his legal counsel, the lines on his face deepened by weeks of silence, shame, and subpoenas. Outside the hearing room, protesters chanted, not with rage, but with something deeper, resolve. Inside, Karoline Leavitt sat upright in a navy suit, her expression calm, unreadable. But her eyes never left Belridge, not once. And he noticed. She wasn't there for vengeance. She was there for justice. The chair of the committee cleared her throat. "Ms. Leavitt, you may proceed with your final remarks." Karoline rose. There were no cue cards in her hands, no advisors beside her, just the truth. Judge Belridge's slap wasn't just an act of violence. It was a window into a system where power protects itself, where truth is twisted, and where justice is sold, not served. She paused, letting the silence carry the weight of her words. "I stand here not as a political figure. I stand here as a mother, as a citizen, and as someone who still believes that in America, no one, not even a judge, is above the law." Murmurs rippled through the room. Reporters typed rapidly. Cameramen leaned closer. I was raised to believe that character still matters, that standing for something might cost you, but never as much as staying silent. And so I stood, and I will keep standing, for every American who's been told their voice doesn't matter. She looked over her shoulder, not at the crowd, but at the camera broadcasting live to millions. To the seniors who fought in foreign wars and came home to a system that doesn't always honor them. To the single parents who teach their kids right from wrong while courts play politics. To the young girls watching tonight, wondering if they can face giants and not fall. Yes, you can. Because I did. Thunderous applause erupted. Even some on the committee clapped. Judge Belridge lowered his head. It was over. 3 weeks later, Belridge was removed from the bench. Permanently. Federal investigators traced his connection to shadow donors, discovered hidden income from political nonprofits, and reopened 3 cases he had wrongfully dismissed, all of them involving conservative plaintiffs. But Karoline didn't claim victory, because this wasn't about winning. It was about waking up a nation. Meanwhile, Senator Miles Devereaux, the man behind the curtain, announced his resignation in a hurried press conference filled with deflections and awkward silence. The press didn't buy it. Neither did the people. And Karoline? She didn't respond with a statement. She didn't even tweet. She simply walked into a local New Hampshire elementary school that day, gave a short talk on integrity and leadership, and hugged 3 kids who told her she was the bravest lady on TV. Back at the White House, Karoline sat in her office one evening, the sun setting behind her. On her desk sat a stack of mail, letters from across the country. Some were from retired judges thanking her for restoring faith in the robe. Others came from high school students inspired to study law. One, handwritten in shaking script, read, "My husband was a soldier. He believed in truth. When I saw you stand tall after the slap, I saw him in you. Thank you for reminding us what America still looks like." Karoline folded the letter gently, tears welling. She looked out the window at the Washington Monument, glowing against the dusk sky. "We did something good," she whispered. Behind her, a new plaque had just been mounted on her wall. One voice can break the silence. One truth can start a fire. And if you've made it this far, then, do you believe justice should come with a cost or be handed out like privilege? Comment below. What would you have done if you were Karoline? Subscribe for more real stories where truth prevails, even when the odds are stacked high. Share this video with someone who needs the courage to stand up, even when standing alone. Because in a nation built by rebels and truth tellers, justice doesn't bow, it rises.